Hi everyone, I am so excited to bring you the second video in my series of oil painting for beginners. And today I'm going to show you the way I paint realistic oil portraits. Specifically the eyes, noses, and lips. It doesn't matter if you have a looser or more precise style or no style at all at this point. The two tips I'm going to share with you can apply to anyone and any portrait and any skin tone. So to start off, I'm using a piece of 9x12 Canson XL watercolor paper. I've taped it to my canvas and primed it with some gray craft paint, since I find it grips the paint much better than things like gesso. I ended up rotating the canvas, but I've done both landscape and portrait orientations, and it depends on what you want for your final product. So the first of the two tips to make a perfect portrait, so to speak, is proportion. You can be the most brilliant artist at detailing facial features, but if your proportions are off, your painting just won't look realistic. So the general advice I can give for this is to practice drafting, which is basically sketching very quickly and focusing on keeping the proportions correctly rather than the details. So take a look at some proportion and drafting videos on YouTube. I won't go into that today because there are way better people on this platform to explain it to you. I'll put one in the cards. But the tip I'm going to share with you today, if you really want to focus your time on the painting, is this. Print out a picture, or in my case, the outline of a picture. So once you have it printed out in the proper proportions, alliteration, you can easily use graphite, pastel, or charcoal to cover the backside of the paper, at least in the areas you want to transfer to the canvas. And you can check to make sure you've covered the painting by holding your paper up to a light source. Next, you'll tape or hold your paper to your surface, and I use a pen since the tip is tough and transfers the medium best in my opinion. You just use this to sketch and trace out the proportions, and there you go. You can be as specific as you want with this, but as you can see, I really only sketch out the general areas of the face, so the edges of the eye, the top and bottom of the head, and the width of the nose and the mouth. So I don't go too much into the details with pen because I like to do that with my oil paints. And now we can focus on tip number 2, which is values. If you've watched other videos like this on YouTube, they probably mention the importance of keeping colors true to the reference, and this is true to a point. Sometimes your black paint or dark colors won't dry as dark as your reference, but the general gist is to keep those tones as true as possible. Otherwise, your painting does not have the appropriate contrast that gives it dimension. Don't feel like it's cheating to upload your photo to Photoshop, or one of my favorites on the go is getting an iPhone or Android, whatever, app store color palette app. So you can see where certain kind of hard to identify tone sits on the color wheel, because there's this thing called color constancy where our eyes perceive a color as what we believe it to be based on its surroundings rather than the actual true color if you were to select that color. So for example, if you were to look outside at the snow, if you're in a snowy area, your brain would think, oh, that's white. But really, if you selected some of the colors in the shadows, they would be blue. If you selected some of the highlights, they would be yellow from the sunlight. Making sure you have those proper values will really add realism and dimension to your paintings. Starting with the eyes, I typically keep my painting very precise. The only brush I use to paint these features is this tiny little detail brush that was very cheap and very good. And the brand is Artist Loft, and I wish they would sponsor me because I pretty much use them exclusively, which just goes to show you don't need to spend a lot of money to get a good result. You can use whichever brush gives you the finish you want, whether you want the painting to appear more looser or more detailed. All of these tips still apply. It's just the method of laying down the paint is different. So the whites of my reference's eyes are a bright gray with an orange yellowish tint with blues in some areas. And remember, the eyes are a sphere. They're a 3D object, so they won't usually appear as one color, maybe unless the light is super harsh, but it's really not usual. The pupil diffuses into the iris, so it's not going to be a very sharp line into the colored part of the eye, which is also not going to be a sharp line going into the whites of the eye. And the iris is usually surrounded by a very neutral blue-gray ring that really comes off as blending the iris, like I said, into the surrounding sclera or the eye whites. Usually sharp lines are just not super present on a face, even if they appear so make sure you have colors to transition the dark lines into the lighter areas. I find what brings features to life the most is maintaining the color tones, of course, but also adding splashes of light. So I'll go into exactly the locations I put light at the end of this video, as I'm doing the final touches on this part of the painting, but my reference photo does not actually have that many high points on the model's face where the light is very brightly reflected. I went ahead and added those throughout since it seems to give more life. I've been refraining lately from painting eyelashes because I just simply cannot get a thin enough brush to make it look realistic. But you can see it's really not so necessary when you have the proper values in place. Also, there tend to be some blue-toned hues beneath the eye, so the under eye circles where the skin is thinner and therefore more translucent. But now, remember, blue tone does not mean blue. So this could mean anything from taking the orange tones that most faces are composed of and cooling it down with some gray or black and white. And it could also mean adding a little bit of your blue color, so whatever blue you have on hand, to the orange paint. And rarely on a face are there green or blue tones that actually involve those colors, except, in the eyes maybe, that involve those colors exclusively. So usually it's some form of, like I said, cooling down the orange hues. However, I'm not going to tell you what to do. If you want to use true blues and greens, you can have a really beautiful painting. So for example, in this eye study I posted on my Instagram, I did use very green toned colors on this eye, but there was still a foundation of orange tones. So you can see how just adding those neutralizers or those cooling tones can make a color come off as much more blue or green simply because it is juxtaposed next to much more orange tones. If that didn't make too much sense, basically you can have two orange tones next to each other and one looks very cool toned just because the other one looks very warm toned. And that's why it's important to remember to keep the values of the face true to what your reference is in terms of lightness and darkness. Even if it seems really dark on your paper, it's going to be more accurate when you're finished with your piece. And that's another reason I like to paint on gray toned paper, because it helps kind of take away some of that shock of seeing a really dark color like an eye white on a white paper. As you progress down the nose, it's important to remember that it will not always be symmetrical in color. So some areas of one side may be darker than those same areas on the other side. In this case, just make sure to keep track of where you place the colors. So as you mix the colors on your palette, you will start to remember where you kept the color you used, where you mixed that more cool tone shadow or where that brighter pinkish color was. Using more red tones on the nose can also help give more life to the painting, even if that's not necessarily the same as your reference. And it's okay if your painting does not look exactly like the reference. I know mine is as similar as I can get to it, but it's not going to be exact. Like mentioned before, do not be afraid to use very dark colors, even in the middle of the face. Inside the nostrils of this painting was nearly black, and the edges of the outer nostrils, where the nose sits on the cheek, was also quite dark. I think painting lips is my biggest weak point. They're a very strange three-dimensional structure, and they have hundreds of more three-dimensional structures on top, like wrinkles and creases. In this case, what works best for me is starting with a base layer of the general colors. So if I blur my eyes out a little and lay down those colors first. Lips are rarely super smooth and wrinkleless unless you have like really cool lips or like lip injections, I guess. Anyways, I will lay down those colors and then try and place the darkest colors as well to really create the form in the lips. This can be tricky because the lips can have many tones from oranges to purples and in between, and usually these tones are much more pronounced than the different tones on the face. So after I've laid those colors down, I try and give the illusion of detail by using a paler pink, in this case, to create little zigzags of highlights. In the end, it does give off the proper effect, but don't be afraid to, again, stray from the reference if you need to. For the eyebrows, I typically find the central color, be it black or dark brown or orange or blonde, and lay down that color in the general eyebrow shape. Then I use my brush to blend the skin color wet paint surrounding the brow into the brow color, which creates a diffused look. Then I continue to build up the skin color or eyebrow color when I need to, so it doesn't create too many grays in the skin, and eventually I'll add splashes of skin color to the inner corners of the eyebrows to show that it's a sparser area of eyebrow hair and there's some skin peeking through. So the places I typically use bright, near white colors to highlight, despite what my references have, usually include the iris, parts of the eye white, the eye waterline, or the lower lid area of the eye, the inner corners of the eye, the upper and lower eyelid, the bridge and tip of the nose, the cupid's bow, or the area right above the lip, and the upper and lower lip. I'll also do the chin and cheeks and, the hair, but that's for another time, not to worry about today. So that's going to be it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if this helped you at all, and send it to a friend who needs some help with facial features or for painting facial features. I don't know. I'll see you next time for more advice. I'll talk to you guys next time.